Jordan Peterson gives a brilliant response to a progressive student on a question about sex and sexuality. And in this video, we are going to respond to that. My name is Aaron. Welcome back to the channel. And let's get right into this thing. Here's the video, and we're going to stop and go as we go along and talk about it a little bit.
So my question is, as a redeemed progressive, what is the key to empowering men in the Me Too age while maintaining healthy boundaries and strong behavioral expectations?
We've had relatively reliable birth control since 1960. Okay, that's not very long. And we underestimate the unbelievable technological triumph of birth control. It's the hydrogen bomb, it's the transistor, like it's a major league transformation in human interaction. Women are now free from involuntary reproduction. That's never been the case in the entire history of the planet. Okay, we don't know exactly what to do about that. Okay, so the first idea in the 60s was, hell, let's party. And you know, you could see why. It's like what the rules for not engaging in promiscuous sexual intercourse seemed to have vanished. So we had a couple of decades of experimentation. It's like, well, how'd that go? Little hard on the family, I would say. That's not so good for kids. AIDS, that wasn't a plus. Could have killed us all. And it mutated, particularly to take advantage of promiscuous sex, because viruses are very tricky things. So it turns out that sex is a little bit more complicated than we thought. Well, it actually turns out that it's a lot more complicated than we think. Okay, and now it's 50, 60 years later.
Okay, so he's saying basically that we removed the natural consequences from sex. And so he lists out family and particularly the kids. Like, yeah, I think that if you have kids who don't have fathers or kids from split homes, they grow up at a significant disadvantage than with kids that grow up with a two-parent household. And then he says AIDS, right? Like AIDS could have killed us all, and it's kept on mutating. And now it's one of those things where like, wow, that is something that was not a positive, result or consequence from the removal of the consequences, the natural consequences of sex. And so we sit here and he's saying that the birth control, that was able to unlock a whole host of things that humanity had never seen before. And I've heard this story one time of a person who lost their pain receptors within their hand. And what happens if you can't feel pain, if that consequence of pain is removed from your hand, if you put your hand on a stove, you don't have that thing to tell you to pull your hand off anymore, right? Your hand will burn because you feel no pain. So now you deal with a more severe consequence than if it was just for that momentary pain. And that's kind of how I see this. Like the removal of that like consequence, the natural consequence of having babies had removed and given like free clearance for women and men to have sex all they want, because they didn't have to deal with the consequence, the lifelong consequence of having a baby. Now we see the results of that created throughout all of modern history now, because people don't want to live with the consequence of having a kid, they're going to rationalize in their brains, oh, it's not really a kid, it's a clump of cells. Oh, it's my body, my choice. Oh, that's not a real baby. Well, that's a baby in there. And so whatever way to rationalize, like, I don't want to take the consequence for what I deem to be, my right, my entitlement is to have sex with whoever I want with no natural consequences. That's what I think what we're experiencing right here. So it's entitled to wanting responsibility of kids without or wanting the fun of making a kid without the responsibility of having a kid, and just we've never seen that in the course of human history before. And I think that's an interesting insight there.
and we're trying to sort this out. It's like, well, when is it okay to have sex? Exactly. And when is it not okay to have sex? And what does it mean that it's okay? And what does consent mean? And the answer to that is, well, we never used to have to think these things through because the rule was don't have sex until you get married. That was the rule. Now that isn't the rule. Okay, so what's the rule? Well, we're not having a conversation about the rule. We're waiting till someone does something that seems like it might be untoward and then mobbing them and trying to extract the rule out that way. And it's not a very effective way of doing it. You know, you want to decrease campus rape? That's easy. Get rid of alcohol. No one has that conversation. It's like I did my PhD work on alcohol. 50% of the people who are murdered are drunk. And 50% of the people who kill them are drunk. And almost all the date rape situations are consequences of excess intoxication. But yet there's a party culture on campuses and anything goes. And you also have this strange thing, especially on the radical left, which is unbelievably paradoxical, where absolutely every form of sexual expression imaginable is 100% permissible because sex is fine, but it's so dangerous that while you're dancing with someone at a Princeton mixer, you have to ask them 2 or 3 times if it's okay for you to continue. And that's actually the case, by the way. I'm not making that up. It's like, well, both of those things can't be true. Now, what's happening, I think, on the Me Too end of things and the affirmative consent end of things is the old sexual taboos are reasserting themselves. The idea that we can extract sex out from emotional intimacy, and especially emotional intimacy, I would say, psychological intimacy, maybe even from long-term relationship, I don't believe it's a tenable idea. I don't think we can do it. And a lot of what we're seeing is the backlash against that. It's like, well, I feel used. You know, because one of the things that's happening on the really radical end of the anti-sexual abuse movement is the idea that, well, if you have intercourse with someone and then you regret it the next day, that's evidence that it wasn't consensual. Well, it is, in a sense, evidence that it wasn't consensual because it's evidence that you didn't bloody well think it through, right? It was good for last night, but it's not good for today. It's not very wise. The question is, well, what constitutes consent? And we need to have a very serious conversation about that. Like, under what circumstances is it acceptable to give consent? But we're not mature enough to have that conversation. We want it both ways. We want to be able to do whatever we want, with whoever we want, whenever we want, with no consequences, and we want there never to be any trouble about consent. It's like, well, no, that's not going to happen.
So have you ever known someone or did this yourself where you've bought a car, a really expensive car? I had a friend who had a Porsche, and he bought the Porsche, but he didn't realize that oil changes were over $100, over $150 for him. He didn't realize that he had to put premium gas in it. He didn't realize that the insurance was that much more expensive when you've got a teenager in college driving around a Porsche. My point is that he wanted to be able to live out his fantasies or his dreams driving a Porsche without the burden and the baggage and the consequences and the responsibility of owning the Porsche. And in the same way, that's what I think Jordan Peterson is getting at. We want to extract sex, like that physical act of sex, from emotional intimacy, psychological intimacy, and I would even go so far as commitment, financial intimacy goes along with that. Because if you have a kid, you have a partner for life. This is just a natural consequence of sex, is to have a child, to bring forth life. And so we oftentimes just want the good without the bad. We want to be able to eat whatever we want and not get fat. We want to be able to say whatever we want and not get punched. And we want to be able to have sex with whoever we want and not regret it. And that's what he's saying here, I think, is that just because you regret it doesn't mean that it was rape or non-consensual or whatever. We want to remove natural consequences away from just our feelings to want to be able to, have sex with whoever we want. Now, is this all the time for birth control? No, I don't think so. I'm sure it's not black and white as that, and we don't have to get into the nuances of that right now. But this is silly to think that you could remove the natural consequences from something like that, and then get angry, and then rework all of reality, all of language. Like that's what they're saying right now is like, and this just what I said earlier is like now they're trying to, pretend like that's not a baby in there. They're trying to pretend that like, oh, that's not human life in there. But that's silly. That's silly.
I don't think that sex works very well outside of committed relationships. I don't think there's any evidence that it does. There's a strong proclivity across cultures for the enforcement, social enforcement of long-term monogamy. And there's reasons for that. And I think you deviate from that at your peril. So now, if you want to deviate from that, there's all sorts of reasons to do it. And I can understand why people are interested in adventure and all of that. But, my sense also as a clinician is, you only really get to try out about 5 people in your life. You have to make a decision pretty damn quick. Like between 20 and 30, there's a lot of things to get straight, and long-term mate is usually one of them. And most of the time, people should be more careful with their sexual behavior when they're young, especially when they're drunk, than they are. And I just think it's so interesting that all of the taboo reconstruction is coming from the radical left. It's not what you'd expect at all. You'd think it'd be the damn right-wing Christians complaining about, sexual immorality. It's like, no, it's the radical lefties. You have to have signed consent before making any physical move. And then that's so what? Really? Who thought that up? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You know how awkward that would be? You're supposed to be able to do a little bit of nonverbal reading, right? I mean, that's part of romance. You ever see a movie where the 2 people who are dating exchange consent notes? Like, that doesn't happen. So it's an unrealistic solution.
Yeah, here, could you just, before we, could you just sign, just sign this? Yeah, he's right. It's silly. It's not realistic. It's not even like, it's not productive. You know what I'm saying? But he does bring up a good point here. He says that, hey, there's a thing that you need to protect against. Like sex will bind you for life if you produce a child. I mean, you are connected to that person for life. And so you have to protect against that because you need to know, like, okay, is that person someone I would raise a family with? Is that person economically stable and financially stable? Is that person emotionally stable? Can I see myself getting old with this person? Can I see myself raising a child with this? Can I see my child ending up like this person? That's something. Do they have the same values as myself? Do they have the same life goals and life trajectory as I do? That's the kind of things that you got to protect against, because if you're sharing physical intimacy, which is like, it's the pinnacle of physicality, like physical knowledge of someone else. It's the pinnacle, and you don't share you're not on par, all the highest levels on a spiritual basis, on a values basis, and you don't agree with them directionally in life, and all of that, right? You are playing with fire by like connecting yourself forever with somebody, when you don't know if you're willing to commit to them or they're willing to commit to you. So that's just an interesting thought. It's a means of protection when you're selecting a particular partner. And he says that, he was kind of loose on it. He says you probably can try out 5 people. I think you just have to, get married, right? That's the solution that's been given for such a long time here. But, what do I know?
But I think the real solution is that despite the fact that we have reliable birth control, we're going to have to relearn what the acceptable rules of propriety are with regards to sexual relationships. One of the things I often tell my young clients is, don't do anything physically with anyone that you wouldn't talk to them about. Because if you're too damn embarrassed to talk about it, well, maybe it's a little premature in the relationship to actually do it. And then there's harm in it. You know, there's emotional harm in it on both parties. There's the cheapening of both parties. So it's going to take us a long time to sort this out. But hopefully we can do it in a serious manner. And
yeah, I think this is going to take a long time for the rest of the world to figure this out. However, I think the Bible has it figured out already for us. You know, I mean, like, it's driving me crazy. God ordained for it to work a specific way. Oftentimes I use this example of, like, if someone gave you a Ferrari and they give you, like, hey, this is how the Ferrari works. This is the type of gas it takes in the Ferrari. So don't put any other type of gas in it, and just drive it the way I built it. Well, what if I take bubble solution, like bubble fluid, and I pour it in the gas tank? Because when I rev that engine, right, bubbles will shoot out the exhaust. Well, you're gonna break the car. And in the same way, I see sex in the same way. God created sex as something awesome, but there are specific instructions with it. Otherwise, you break your life. Otherwise, bad things happen. Back to the beginning of the video, right? Families are destroyed. And when I say destroyed, I don't really mean destroy. I mean, like, it's very, very difficult. Anyone will tell you that there are more advantages to a two-person or two-parent household that's the nuclear family, rather than someone whose mom was sleeping around and you've got half brothers and sisters all over the place, and dads who are nowhere to be, and no commitment, and the financial stability is not there, and the commitment's not there, and the future's not there, and the stable home life and the discipline is not there because there's no father figure. It goes on and on and on and on. I've seen it over and over again. You could just look at around you and look at the statistics. It's very obvious. So God created sex to be inside the confines of a husband and wife, and that's how human life was created to flourish. So to figure out stuff, and I disagree with Jordan Peterson here, it's already figured out. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I know you guys are probably going to flame me for being, you know, that Christian that's always so old-fashioned, but it's okay. It's all love here. Drop a comment in the section. Be happy to dialogue about it. Anyway, talk to you soon. Bye.